Hi, everyone. We'll get started as soon as everyone is here. Yeah. Is there a host here that can enable transcription, please? Make sure the recording is looking fine. Okay, I believe we should start, but it doesn't seem like there is anyone here from BTI that can enable transcription. So you guys have text and I don't have hosting privileges. I don't even know if it's recording right now. Is there a host here? Okay, we'll start as it's already kind of late. So let's get going. And about transcription, I'm sure someone will enable them at some point. So today we're going to tackle the second part of our React course. It's going to be a 3-part course. So expect another one last part next week. So let's start by reviewing what we did today, yesterday, excuse me, in the first part. So what we did is that we used the function. Let me just get the font bigger. Okay. What we did is that we used a tool called Create React App through npx, which is a command that you should have running and installed if you're using Node and npm. So we used npx create React App to create basically an app. I'm not going to go through with this because we don't need to. And this created for us a new project called Game On. Let's open it in code. Okay, so let's open the code. All right, we don't need this. Okay, so we had generated this code for us, and let's start it to see the final where we stopped. We need every time to launch our project thanks to the command npm start. What that does is that will start running the project and open a web browser with our project. So let's see, we had this. This is what we made before exiting yesterday's lesson. So let's review what we did to get here. Create React App generated a project for us with basically a public folder where we'll find our one and only HTML file, which will basically be almost empty. We'll have a head with the website's title and the icon, etc. But you'll see that in the body, we only have one div, and this is where everything will be inserted in our app. How that is done is if we go to src, we have an index.js file, and everything runs through a function called react-dom.render that takes basically our root component, the highest parent in our React components, and inserts it into the root element in our index.html that we just saw. So what do we have in our app.js, which is the biggest parent? Like we talked about yesterday, we need to imagine React components as having a hierarchy like trees, a bit like HTML, where you have one big parent. In HTML, that's the HTML tag. Then you have a smaller parent, that's the body, etc. In React, that's the same. All components have a parent, and all components can have children. And we saw that through a tool that we installed as well on the browser, which is React DevTools. So if I go to localhost again here, and I open this, we'll see that we have components here. If we inside React DevTools with our tree, our hierarchy here. So we have the app, we have game cards, and we have hello at 2 places. So everything looks like this, and there's always one big parent, which is going to be our app. So we went to our app and we created 2 components. We created hello first, which we are calling here, that we are going to take a look at. So we have hello. And hello, basically, like every React component, especially we're talking here about class components. We'll be talking about function components in the part 3 of this course. Every class React component needs to extend React.component and needs to implement a render function. That's the minimum. So here in the render, we're just logging to the console and not returning anything. That's just a simple bare-bone component. Most importantly, the component we'll be using more is the component that we can see here in the app that is called game cards. So if we go into game cards, we should see that we have this index, which is our component, which loads a number of other files in the same folder. We have the data, which is going to be our game JSON. This could be, as we showcased yesterday, and we'll see again today in more detail, can come from an HTTP request from a distant server, and not only from a file, as long as you get the JSON. So this is our data.json. We have a utility.js where we have a function called render game element that takes one data and returns basically a GSX element to it. We imported all of this, and basically we are displaying it. Another thing we saw is how to implement styling in our components in two ways. We created a JavaScript function called generate styles, which generates basically a styled JSON, which can then be called in here in any component by giving it a style prop and giving it the object. We also saw how to use and import direct CSS directly into our React component by simply using import and the path to our CSS. And we created the CSS here where we made everything responsive to reach the result that we see here, with our screen being fine, our display being fine, no matter the size of the screen, even on the mobile. To do that, we saw a few concepts. We saw what RAM and EM sizes were. We saw VWs. We saw flex displays with the display flex. We saw many CSS properties linked to flex, like flex direction, justify contact, and flex wrap. And we've seen the media queries to apply certain CSS only at certain screen sizes. That's what allows us basically, for example, to break this into 2 cards per line to 1 single card per line when we go in under a certain screen size. So that's where we stopped yesterday. I don't know if you guys reviewed what we did and have some questions before we start today's lesson. Is there anything in what we did that is in need of clarifying for any one of you? Render data. The render data function is not clear? Okay. Basically, what we are doing with the render data function is that we take JSON and we return GSX. Why we do that? Like, let me get back to cards. Here we have, let's take this. What we could do is basically get the game data that we're taking from the JSON. Let's do something here, my GSX. And we could have GSX here. This is my GSX. And just here, return my GSX. But then this game data, in the game data, we have many games. We have many data. We need to do it multiple times. So what we do is that instead of doing, for example, my GSX1 and my GSX2, with my GSX2 being like this, for example, game data, we'd need to do this. The first element in the array, and the second element in the array, GSX2. We could do game data, games data, I'm sorry. So this works, but what we had to do is that we had to write the same code twice. What render data does is it takes our whole data, takes this array, And all it does is basically go through the data and give us one GSX, so that here we can just create a loop map with the map and create an array of GSX without having to write this multiple times. Basically, render data just takes one JSON and returns GSX to display the JSON. Is that clearer, Aman Ibrahim? Is that any clearer? Well, okay, I get no answer, but I assume that is maybe clear. Does anyone have any other questions? All right. If what we did yesterday is clear for everyone, then let's move on to today's lesson. Let's get back to here. So what will we be learning today? Today we'll take a look at HTML events in React. We started looking at it a bit yesterday with on clicks and mostly on click. We'll take a look at a little more events and some other ways to create HTML events in React. We'll look at state and how to it may do bidirectional data binding like we did without React last week. But this time we'll see how React makes it easy and how we can do it basically in React. We'll also look at how we can pass data between components using props, and we'll take a look at lifecycle methods, which we briefly touched upon yesterday. Basically, you saw component did mount yesterday at some point of the lesson. We'll take a look more in depth at that today. We'll take, of course, 15 minutes break in the middle, and then we'll start looking at the fetch API that we'll use to get some data from another server thanks to HTTP requests. And we'll take a look at a library that is very commonly used with React, which is called Reactor Router. We'll also use prop types, and we'll finish with some questions and answers if you have any about today. So let's get started. HTML events in React. You know HTML events from HTML before. For example, when you create a button, you're used to add on click with the name of the function inside. As we've seen today, that is rather different in GSX and two, particularly in two syntax elements, is that React events are named using camel case rather than lowercase. What that means is that instead of using on click with all lower cases, we tend to separate words by inserting one capital case letter. So this is in HTML. You can look at the example on click, and in React it would be on click like this. With GSX also, we don't pass a string. We pass the function as the event handler and separate it between accolades. So you must open accolades and just call the function instead of giving its name in a string. So some ways, there is a second way we can insert events, like in JavaScript, for example. Before we started on React, we could either call events directly in the HTML, or we could, in JavaScript, use query selectors, like query selector function, or get element by ID, or get elements by class name, and then use the function add event listener. So we can attach basically an event listener to that specific element. We'll see a way in React to do the same without going through the GSX. We'll use refs, what we call refs, to basically trigger an event and add an event listener. Refs will showcase them in this lesson, but they are really shouldn't be abused. You shouldn't use them a lot because basically GSX allows you to handle most cases declaratively, thanks to states and props that we'll see later on. But it is important that you know them because in a few use cases, they're really great. For example, when we want to manage focus on a text input, I want to manage text selection, or when we have a media player, for example, like you have on YouTube, and you want to basically trigger the play and pause functions in the player. They're also very good at with integrating third-party DOM libraries and when triggering animations. So let's get to the code and see how we can do that in our project, basically. Let's get back to our code. And yesterday we started creating a component called game form that we commented, but that we're going to bring back. So let's get to our game form. So this is our game form. As we can see, it is here. So let's style it a bit. Let's add styles.css like we did for game cards. Let's give it a bit of a style. Let's so the idea is game form. So game. Let's style it just a bit. Let's put this form in a div, maybe. Okay. And we can copy actually the styling from here, from the container. And we can have it. We use this style, these styles here. Let's just take them and have them in our CSS here. Of course, we'll be changing this background color. Light gray. Let's have border. So let's change a few things because we had it in JSON format. Where did we get the data in game form? So I have no data. Yesterday, we've written some GSX. We written it together yesterday when we saw, basically we started seeing how the differences between GSX and HTML. Basically, for example, in the labels, we use HTML4 instead of 4, and we saw how unsubmit is not written the same anymore. So we wrote it actually yesterday. There is no data here. It's just a form with one input that we added yesterday. So we're just going to go back to this component we started on and build on it today's lesson. So everything in this lesson will be done on this project. On Git, you will find different branches for every lesson, and the master will always be the one that is most up to date. So here we should be getting, we should be importing our CSS, otherwise it won't work. Styles.css. And there we go. We have some styling done. Let's increase the font size maybe a bit. Font size and have it 1.5 rem. Oops. That's better. Okay. So we have a title. And what I want to do is what we want to build a form to add games to our list here. So we need the title, we need the genre, we need the year and the developer. So let's build our form. Let's create divs here. Let's create a div that will give a class name called form item. And then we can just do this. And we can copy it. We said we have the title, genre, year, and developer. So let's do that again. Title, genre, year, and developer. And then we'll have the type submit here. Let's change these to game genre, game year, game developer, and give it a name as well. Let's write a name and our inputs name equal, which is going to be the key in our form data. Game, and change it again here, genre, year, and developer. Let's see how it looks. All right, we have our inputs right now, but it doesn't look great. Let's add some CSS. Button and say, for example, it has padding of 5 pixels, maybe 8 pixels. And font weight, let's make it bold. So let's have it like this. And then we can have if we want it to be, we can have another here with the class item. We can have form items. Let's make it like we did yesterday. It's a good way to review flex. We'll make this a flex display. And let's choose the flex direction row. And let's justify our content with space between, which should give us this display. We'll also add a margin of, let's see, let's have a margin of 10 pixels by 15 pixels. It should give us some spacing. And let's make our inputs at a fixed size. Let's make our inputs width at 15 EM for 15 characters every time. Or maybe a bit bigger, 25 EM. There we go. So we have our form here. And well, we can get started. So we have the submit. Let's get back to our JavaScript. We have our submit function, right? And we have this event, which will give us if we go and submit, it should give us here basically the event we're getting and should execute everything properly. So we have our target is a form, and we should be able to access the form here. Okay. Let's see if we can get. Let's say here, if we can get everything, let's see what we can get in our, that we should be getting here, data equal should be in our target event, the target dot elements. Let's see what we find here and see if we can get our data this way. Let's take a look. Let's write anything here and see what happens. So we get our data and we should be getting a lot of things in our elements, but we're not getting single values. It's a collection of 5, so maybe if we go and have HTML form collection, if we go and do a for loop, then I believe we can access it this way. We can have here data and value should be data I dot value. And let's see what we get every time if it's this correct. Let's see. Let's write anything just to see if it works correctly. So yes, we're getting our values. So all we need to do now is have here initiate an object. Say our, let's say here we have data object, data. Let's call data again and have it be an empty object. And then we can have here form items instead of data to loop through. And every time we can add to data dot, we should be getting name as well, that name, name equal value. And let's see what that gives us at the end. Console.log, our data. Let's see everything, if everything is fine. Let's send our title, our general, a year, and the developer. Our data has everything correctly, except for this, we have a fifth value. So let's say if, let's add something here. Length is superior to 0. Because this will get some extra elements like we saw earlier. There isn't only our inputs as elements in the form. So this should fix that and give us only what we inserted. So we submit again, and now we should see that our data is fine. We don't need the prototype neither. What is this? Okay. All right. Now we can do anything we want with this data and basically go. We'll return to it later on when we'll be studying states. Do something with the data because we want to add it. Remember, we want that data to be displayed here on the bottom. Why you put if? Why I put if? Because as you can see here, there are other items. What we are doing is that we are looping through elements in the form to get their names and values. And what that does basically is that it gives us sometimes elements that have no name and no value. So basically what I'm doing, I'm putting if so I don't get this specific empty elements that have no name and no value. So I'm testing if there is a name, basically if it's an input, then add it to my data. If it's not, I don't need to add it to my data. It's just to filter through what I need and what I don't in the elements of the form. From elements, because what it does is that it loops event that target that elements. How it works is that it goes through all elements inside our form here. Basically, that elements will go and see all children in the form. I will console log it so you can see it again. Let's add the console.log elements and give it event the target dot elements. Let's start use it again. We'll submit and we'll see that it gives us 5 elements that are detected inside our basically our form. We have our inputs and the button. And to answer your question, Sundus, this empty is coming from the button because the button has no name and no value. So it will get a name and value from our inputs. So the input has a name, the second one has a name, the third one has a name, the fourth one has a name, but our 5th element, which is the button, is detected by target.elements, but has no name, and we shouldn't be getting it and putting it in our data anyway. So the empty comes from there. And I believe that maybe target.elements is maybe clearer now. Basically, what it takes is all elements under the collection. Here it takes HTML form control collection. So basically, if you call it in a form, it will call all elements that are important to the form. For example, if we have an input, if we have a button, or if we have a text area, or a select, all these elements that are important and considered form controls will be returned by this by event that target.elements. And it's something that is inside the browser and is not specific to React. You can also use it outside of React, basically. But since React doesn't handle the forms as they are used to in the HTML, because we're using JSX, we need to be getting our names and basically mapping them to an object. We'll see an easier way to do that when we get to the state. I hope that answers your question. Is that clear? Okay. We'll see a second way to handle the submit instead of using this. Instead of using this, we can use another way to map the unsubmit. Let's say we get rid of the unsubmit here. If we get rid of the unsubmit and we refresh the page, normally now if we write something and we press on the button, basically nothing happens. So we need to map handle submit again into our form. So what we do is that there is a function inside of React. For example, here we'll do, for example, we'll add a constructor. You guys know constructors. And what we'll do inside the constructor is that we'll create this dot form ref equals React dot create ref. Okay. This creates a reference, basically referencing in JSX. And what we do is that we can then take this form ref, and here we can map it. We can add ref equals this dot form ref. Basically, we give it the ref, and now we can target. We can do anything like from if this dot from form ref okay. We must have a function binding bind add event to form, and what we do is that we come here and then we can bind this if this dot form ref. We can then use this dot form ref dot current dot add event listener, and we can add submit and our handle submit function. Now we just need to run this. We'll use a lifecycle method. We'll come back to it later to explain it better. We'll use component math that we used yesterday. We'll explain it when we get to the button subtitle in the program. Yes, I asked for it earlier, but I am not a host, so I can't add the subtitles. So if there is any host here, please activate transcription. I asked BTI to try and do it earlier, but I am no host, so I can't activate it actually. Is there someone here who can activate the subtitles, please? The transcription. Is there a host in the call who can do that, please? It seems there are no hosts, and I am not a host myself, so I can't activate subtitles. I tried asking BTI to do it, but I don't know why they seem not to be able to do it neither. But I don't have the access to the button, Abu Hamda. I can't because I'm not the host. Unfortunately. So I'll try to talk slowly so you can understand. So in the component, the mount that we will explain later on, what we will do here is that we can basically call add event to form. Let's see if that works. Oh, not add event to form, this that add event to form. And we forgot this here as well. Okay. Let's call super. All right. Yes, I forgot this. And the constructor, we need to call super first. So here, let's take a look. Let's see if it works. Yes, now the event is bound. This is a bit. Can you explain component did mount briefly? Yes, we will explain it in more details later on, but yes, I can explain it briefly right now as well. Component did mount is what we call a life cycle method. We'll touch on it in more details later on, but basically they are functions that are executed at different times for the component. Specifically, did mount executes once when the component is mounted into the DOM. So a component goes through different phases, right? And the first phase it goes through is when React has to take it and put it inside the DOM. Whenever it's done doing that, it executes component did mount and will do everything you put in component did mount. Why here did I use component did mount to execute my function? Because if not, well, the ref has not been attributed yet. Component did mount executes just after the render, after the first render. Excuse me. We'll see more in detail. There are many lifecycle methods. You need to learn them because, like I said, they are executed at certain times. For example, did mount is executed after the first render, and did update, that we'll see later, is executed every time there is a render after that. Basically, think of it this way. If we were not using React, let's say you were using JavaScript, no, we can't execute add event without did mount because it will say that from ref is null because it hasn't rendered it. It hasn't attached to any DOM element. How are you going to add event to something that doesn't exist in the DOM? It didn't exist. It doesn't exist yet. Let's say we call this let's try it. Let's, for example, use this that add event form to form in the constructor and see if it still works. What it will say, you'll see an error, cannot read property add event listener of null. Yes, because it needs to have a value, and if the element doesn't exist in the DOM, we can't add an event listener to it. That's why we add did mount, because after did mount, we know that it is mounted and exists in the DOM. So whenever you need to do something after a render, you'll be using lifecycle methods that we'll see, of course, in more details later. So that's basically both ways to attach an event listener. But of course, this remains to me the most simple one. Handle submit directly in the GSX. And that way you don't need to handle basically the handle submit. And this we can get rid of. Just here to explain basically how we can use ref. So there we go. Let's go. Let's get to our next chapter, as time seems to be running. So we saw React refs. Basically, they replace get element by ID and get elements by class name and all those functions. As you saw, I didn't need to do any of that to get the form. All I needed to do was attach a ref to it. And once it's rendered, I will get that form using this .from ref.current. I will get that element. So let's get to our next chapter, which is going to be the state and bidirectional data binding. So that's really cool because what is state first? So we saw data binding together last week, and some of you found it to be a bit complex and difficult. So that's how it was done before we got libraries doing it for us. But for example, if you're using React, you really don't need to go into that much complexity. It is really made easy thanks to React state. So what is the state? State is basically a plain JavaScript object. It's a JavaScript object that can be declared in any React component. And it always needs to be called state. You can't call it anything else. It's called state. And if you give state to any React component, basically what it does is that it will save any value in that state and will display it wherever you want it displayed. And that acts like a view. And let's say we want to change anything in the state. We have a function that is called setState that we need to use to change anything in the state. And whenever we do, we just need to call this.setState, and anywhere we call the state will be changed automatically. We don't need to worry about anything past that point. setState is also really great at handling forms. It's very powerful when we use state with forms. And let me go through it together with you guys. It may be like props in Vue.js, a bit like props, but we have props in React as well that you will see that are maybe a bit different. But don't forget that Vue doesn't use GSX, so that may be a bit different to what we are doing here. Because the real strength of state is that how easily it binds into GSX for us to do basically data binding. Because Vue, if I'm not mistaken, still uses HTML. So let's get into it. Let's rewrite this form using states. So what I'll do is so you guys can keep this code and see it later. What I'll do is that I'll create a new file, and I'll call this one old.js. We were not going to use it, but it's still there if you want to see the code about ref, for example. And we'll keep editing our index here. So what we'll do, we'll get rid of all of this. We don't need the component mount. We'll get back to on submit here and submit. We'll give it this handle submit. We'll get rid of add event to form. And most importantly, I said earlier that React gives us a way that is easier to handle values. Basically, we can get rid of this as well, event.target elements. It is a way we can do it, but there is a better way that we will see, not a better way, but a way that is more suited for React that we'll see right now. So state, what we'll be doing is that we'll be creating here state. This is our state. All we need to do is declare a state. And well, we can give it whatever we want. We'll give it here form data, and which is going to be an empty object at the start. Okay, this is our form data. Let's start with just working on basically the title here. What we'll do is that we will come here into the input and add a few things. We want the value, we want the input to read its value from the state now. We don't want it to be handling it itself. So here, what we'll do is that we'll have the value being the state, this dot state dot form data dot and here game name. This is our value. And we want to attach a new event to every input that we're going to call handle. Okay, this has changed, it seems. Handle submit. And here we're gonna call it handle change. And it's gonna take event. And let's see what we're going to do. And everything we need here is go there and on change this that handle change. We're gonna add it to our input. What do we do when we execute handle change? What we want is that we need the name and value of this, basically the input calling the function. So we'll do constant name and value that we will be taking from the event.target. Event.target is basically going to be the input calling the event. And then, which is really cool, what we can do is that we can have now this dot set state. We give it the new state. It's going to be form data. We wanted to be getting the old data we have. So basically this dot state dot form data. We're going to have it all there, but we also want to add the name and value here, which will basically give us, will update our state with a new form data, taking the old data and the new property of name that takes the value. In React.js front end, I do need data binding and receive data between pages. Of course, you need data binding and to move data between not only pages, because here we have components. Let's say, you'll see what I mean, but here, this is a component, right? These are not pages. We have a component here and the component here with the form, right, Hossein? And how am I going to, basically for those who don't see it, Hossein asks, do we need data binding and to move data between pages in React.js? So React.js doesn't think in terms of pages. As you have saw, we haven't declared any pages. We have declared components that are separate JavaScripts. And here, we want to write something in this form and send it to here. How are we going to do this if we don't move data from a component to another? So we need to be able to pass data. That's the mission of props that we will see after this. As for data binding, we always need data binding because we need to bind inputs to values. We need to be sending stuff in real time. There are many use cases in web where you need to do data binding. And the data binding, you do it using state, like we are doing here. So here, what we are doing is that we are binding the data from this input into our state. And which is what is really interesting is that we can then add something here. Let's say here we have, let's add a span. And here we can have my value is, and we can easily bind our data here with this dot state dot form data and game name. Oops. This is data binding, right? We're taking data and we're displaying it in real time. So let's see if our data binding works. So we're binding data here. Here, as we are writing, you can see data is bound correctly. Let's get this like this. Maybe get a bigger font. Let's have it here, 2.5 rem. Okay. So here, as we are writing, as you can see, if I write Hossein, it is being changed in real time there. And if I want to display it anywhere else, you can have my value again is, and let's see, binding works. So we bound our data using React state from inputs to displays and to the input itself as well. That's all we need to do here. And why is it very good for forms? This is really good for forms because all we need to do now is that we can basically get rid of the name everywhere. We can get rid of the name. Whoops. Everywhere here, we can get rid of the name. And what we can do, all we need to do is take this and add it to all our inputs. Let's add it here and here. All we need to do is change this here. Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have actually removed the name because we used this for binding. My mistake. We should just take this and add it here and leave the name. I'm sorry. We should leave the name because we need it then to bind from our form to our state. So here, all we need to change is basically the value where it takes it from. Otherwise, it's going to bind to the name. Actually, we're going to leave one at name just to see what happens. See here, we still bound the value for the last input to the name. And what that does is that when I'm writing into the name, you'll see here, it's writing into the other input as well, because they share the same binding name. So we're binding it to the same value in our state. So data binding works between inputs as well, not only between a value, an input and a span or an H1. So here we're gonna bind it to its own. Why I said this is really great for forms, because when we do this here, we're binding everything to our state, right? Here, the form data. And now when we submit, it's way easier because we don't need to map elements or anything. All we need to do is basically send form data. Const data equals this.state.form data. And we can console.log it, and we'll see our data here. We'll see now that, okay, let's clear the console. Let's see, title, John, year, I don't know, 1993, developer Sony. And when I submit, you'll see now it gives me the data, and the data is correct. And I didn't have to do much of anything, actually, because it is already loaded within our state. So this is way easier to handle forms. You don't need to handle much. And what is really cool is that you can actually, for form validation, all you need to do is be here, basically in handling change. You can, before setting state, validating the data. You can validate the data here. For example, here, let's say I want to validate the year, and I want to be able only to write numbers. So what I will do is that I will be writing here, if name equals game year, because that's the value I want to validate, then if name equals game year and value is, excuse me, what is it? What is none? And we'll give it value. Let's say if game year and it's not a number, then we'll return. Now what you'll see is that we can't even, oops, let's see here, is none. Let me see, it seems to have been mistaken and is none. Okay, we don't need to call number actually. So let's get back to here. This is, we don't need this. So let's take a look. Okay. When you write in the year, is it working? No, it's not working. Else, let's add an else here. Here, and there's not a number. How is it updating the value? Let's log this, console.log. I seem to have made a mistake somewhere. Value is none, is supposed to be is none of the value. Let's see. Here is fine, name is fine, is none is true. Okay. Oh, okay. This is my mistake. It should be a number. Okay, now it should work. Let's clear this. Okay, still not working, basically. My bad. Why? game year, value is A, and game year. And this is weird. This is really weird. Let's console.log here. Console.log. Correct. Nope. There's not a writing here. Equal game year. Game year and is not a number, is true. Yes, so why are you writing? Oh, okay. We can have here errors now. That is working fine. Errors, and what we do is that here we can then have this dot state dot this the set state, excuse me, errors, right? We called it errors, and name. Of course, we get the rest of the errors if we have previous errors. That errors. And here we can have, please use a number. And we can have here above here, we can have sort of span with the style, let's say color red. And we can write here this dot state dot errors of game year. Okay, this should work fine now. Let's see. See, it will tell us to please use a number. And then we need to use a number. Else we can still, here we need to add something, which is going to be the errors. We need to empty it again. So there, please use a number, and then it's fine. Okay. We can get this above it actually, instead of inside. There, please use a number. Okay. So basically this is it for the state. But now so this is it for our state and everything. Why you put 3 equal? Okay, 3 equal, like Al-Najjar said, Muhammad, is that it compares both the value and the data type. Basically, what that means is this. Let's say I look into the console. Let's say is 3 equal to 3. This is true, even though they're not the same type. But if I put 3 equals, then it becomes false because one is a string and one is a number. That is the difference. Is that clear, Muhammad? Okay, cool. So let's keep going with the course. Where were we? Okay, state, we saw state and set state. Now we're going to see how to pass data between components. Why? Because like I said, here we have 2 components, the form and this display. And we want to be able to add to our data, basically new games here. So how we'll do this is very simple, is that we'll be using props. So what are props? Basically, props are like state, but that we can pass between components, like we do with HTML attributes. For example, where you see when you have when you use onSubmit, that is looks like an HTML attribute, but in terms of React, that is considered a prop. So props are basically, like we will see, they are, simply put, they are read-only variables that can go from a parent to its children. So props can't be changed by the child, and children can't pass props to their parents. It's the parent that passes props to its children in only one direction. And props can be anything. They can be strings, numbers, arrays, objects, booleans, and basically even functions as well. So let's do this because time is running. Let's see how it looks in the code. So here we've written basically a new game, right? But we wanted to go to game cards. And like I said, where is game cards? If we look here at our component system, we'll see that the form and the cards are on the same level in the hierarchy. So the form can't send anything to the cards. Like I said, only a parent can send props to its children, and cards are not a child of game form. They're a child of app. So what we'll want to do is that we'll want app to handle the data so they can send it to game cards. But this poses the question again, how will game form send data to the app? Well, we'll see this right now with a combination of state and props. Basically what we'll do, let's get back to the app. App here calls both our form and our cards. If we need to pass from children to parent, what do we use? That's what we're going to see right now, actually. We'll use props, but not to pass the data. Not to pass the data. We'll pass something else. Let me show you Doa. And if it's not clear, I'll explain it maybe again, okay? Let's see. Since we can't pass from children to parents normally, the data, what we're going to do is that we're going to handle the data here. So no longer in game cards, we want the data to be handled there. So what we'll do is that we'll take games data, we'll get it off of here, no longer have game data, okay? So this will crash. It says games data not defined. It's not a problem because now we'll move game data here. Before anything, I will show you how we can send from a parent to a child. So the game data, we want it to be here now. Game cards, we're going to call game cards data from basically the components, game cards, and data.json. So we'll call it in the app now, not in the game cards. So how will the game cards have access to it? What we'll do is that it's very simple. We'll come to game cards and give it game data equals game cards data. This is passing a prop. This is a prop. This is the prop name, and this is the prop value. But now that we're sending the prop, we need to receive it in the game cards. We go to game cards, and it's really easy. All we need to do is basically go like this and have, instead of using here games data, like we do here, we're going to use this dot props dot game data. And you'll see that it works again normally. Games data is not defined. Where are we using games data? Games data, I'm sorry. Games data. Now it works again. And the data is being passed from the parent through a prop and then read thanks to this dot props. Is that clear until now, how to pass from parent to child? Is this clear for everyone? Before we go into more complex issue of passing from a child to a parent. Sheikh Ali, can you please mute your microphone? Thank you. So is it clear for everyone up to this point? Please. Okay. We passed the prop, but that doesn't solve our issue, right? The issue is that we can still not send the data from the form to the app because the form is the child. So how do we do? Is that basically we will add something here to the app that you guys know by now. It's the state. And here in the state, we're going to have games that we're going to start not as games, but at games cards data. We're going to put this JSON in our state. And instead of sending it directly, we'll send this .state.games. Okay? And then we'll create a function. We'll create a function called, how are you going to call this? Add game. Okay? Or rather, we call it update my games list. And what it takes is new list. And what it does is that we're going to call this .setState. I assume you remember the set state. And we're going to set here the state with games being basically the new list. We're gonna insert the new list into the state, right? So here, again, we're not sending data. The data is handled in the app, but then what we can do, and this is really nice, is that handle, or we can have on submit equal, this is a prop that we call on submit, and we'll give it update my games list function. So it updates the state. We're gonna send the function that updates our state to the child. And that's really cool because then we can update the parent's state from its child. Even though we can't pass the data, we don't need to pass data now because we can directly update the parent state from the child. That's how we can pass information from a child to a parent. So now we can go to the games form. And what we do is that, let me just check the, okay. What we do, we need this format of object, right? And what we will do is that we'll come here in the, let's go back, and we'll need to send it this state as well. And games data is going to be this .state.games as well. We're gonna need to pass it to current list. And then we'll go to the form. And what you will do here, since we have our form data, we'll basically do, we create a new object. We're going to go do a game obj, and it's going to look like this. So ID is going to be, let's say, this dot props dot what did we call it again? We called it games data. Okay, we go dot games data dot length. So it takes a new number. We're gonna give the name is going to be data of game name. We have the genre, which is going to be data game genre. The year, which is going to be data game year, and the developer, which is going to be data of game, what did we call it? Developer. This should be fine. Now, what we can do is that we pass the function right here called on submit. what we'll do is that we'll take this function, we'll go here on the onSubmit, and what we'll do is we'll call now this .props dot onSubmit and give it a new array, which is going to be this dot props dot games data, basically all data, and our new object as well. Now let's see if this works. Update my games list is not defined. Where is update my games list? In app.js. Update my games list. Oh, okay. I forgot that this dot update my games list. Okay. All right. Now let's try it out. Let's create a new title. Let's say The Witcher 3 genre action RPG again. And it was out in 2014 and it was made by CD Projekt Red. Let's submit our new game and you can see it has been added. We can add another one, Pokemon Blue. It's a JRPG. It was out in 1997 and it was made by Nintendo. And there we go. We added one again. Is it clear for everyone how we achieved this? DOA specifically, especially, does that answer your question of how we can pass data from children to parents? Cool. So basically, since we, not clear for me, adding stage. Ahmed Abu Bakr. The adding stage, okay. How we do is that since we can't send data from the game form to the app, yeah, I mean, I'm sorry for that, Mohammed. It's like we are short on time, so we'll need to process a lot of info in these courses, and hopefully, thanks to your reviews, we'll do coaching, and with practice, you should be able to retain all this information. But it will require a lot of practice from your part as well. Obviously, you can't rely only on the lessons to retain all this information. But let's work together, and if you're stuck, that's the goal. The goal is to get you to a professional level in JavaScript in the shortest amount of time possible. But it requires efforts from both sides, from the teacher's side and from the students as well. You need to practice, and if you're stuck, we are always available. I'm always available. You can always send me a message on WhatsApp and we can schedule a one-on-one to get you unstuck. That is always a possibility. We can always schedule one-on-ones when you're stuck, but you'll need to practice and you'll need to read the references as well and do the effort from your part if you're to become pro. In general, please, can you try in steps in terms of this? Okay, in terms of steps for you, Tarek, and as well for Abu Bakr, for whom it seems to be not perfectly clear. There is the simple process in terms of steps. When we want to pass data from a parent to a child, it's easy, right? Like this, we have the data, we add it to the components calling, like we do in HTML when we want to add an HTML attribute in the same way. This is called the prop. So basically we're sending it a prop called games data, and it takes this.state.games as a value. Then we need to handle it from the child's perspective. When we go to the child, we call this.props and whatever we called it. So here we called it games data. So to retrieve it, we then need to use this.props.games data. Okay? This is the simple use case. This, I believe, is clear. What is harder for you guys is maybe when we want to pass data from children to parents, because we can't use props directly, right? So in this case, what we'll do is the data we want the parent to have. First step, okay. First step is, maybe I should take something to write. Let's open a text editor. When we want to, the more complex issue is when we want to pass data from child to parent, right? So step one, create a state value in the parent to hold the data received from child, okay? Step two, we need to create a function that updates the state value inside the parent. Step three, pass this update function as a prop to the child. Step three, execute the function from the child to update its parent's state. Step five, the parent gets the data from the child directly in its state. Is that clearer, Tarek, in terms of steps? So step one, like we said, is create a state value in the parent, okay? Check, we did that. We went to the state and we added games. That's the data we want to receive, right? That's the step one. Step two, create a function that updates that state's value inside the parent. Check, inside the parent, we created a function called update my games list that uses this set state. So this always needs to use my set state, contains set state, always. This always contains the set state because we want to update the state anyway to get the data. So second step is check. We created the function that updates my state. It calls this.set state and updates the value I created in step one. So step three, we need to pass this update function as a prop to the child. That's what we did. We went to the game form and we gave it a prop called onSubmit, where we send it the function to update its parent state. Okay? That's the step three. Step four, we need to execute that function from the child so the child can update its parent state. So let's go to the child, which is the game form. What we see here is that in handle submit, after we're done with the form, what we do is we call this.props.onSubmit, basically the function we passed in step three, and we give it the new list, basically the old list that we got through props as well, and the new game object that is created within the child. So step five, here, since the child executed this function, the state here is updated. And since we use data binding, we need to do anything because the state binds the data to here and here, and is going to be updated. And that's the strength of data binding, as we saw earlier. We don't need to do anything else since we update the state, it handles the binding to all the children. And then it's back to a parent sending data to its children. Is that a bit clearer? Yeah, React is amazing with data binding, right? State is really, really useful because once we update the state, well, it's bound everywhere. That's the magic of data binding. How does that magic work is through our next chapter. We can actually, we have one other small chapter before we go on break. So let's take another 10 minutes to go through the life cycle methods and then we can take a 15 minutes break, okay? So let's go. You update the state in the app? Yes, I do update the state in the app. And since the state is propagated through props, basically, if I update the state, everything where I use the state is updated as well. Like we saw earlier, remember earlier where we had the input push into the state? Using steps is very good. Yeah, maybe I'll use this more frequently then. Thanks for the feedback. Maybe I'll write steps like this more frequently. But yeah, okay. Maybe I'll add this as a slide to the presentation then. I'll add this right now, so then you can find it maybe later. I'll add something here, just a new slide, and just so you can find steps. I'll come and make it better later on. For now on, we can just resume the presentation to not waste time. So where do we stop? So yeah, next chapter, another chapter before we go on a 15 minutes break. We started on it, so we should be going fairly fast. You saw earlier the component did mount, and we talked about lifecycle methods of it. You've noticed the magic of data binding through the state. What that does, how that works, for those of you who saw the magic just now, is that basically, when you create a component, first step is gets mounted. What does mounting means? Mounting means getting that GSX, making it into HTML, and pushing it to the DOM. Mounting is that process of taking what you made and putting it in the DOM, so we can see it on the web page. That then it is that the render phase goes through the mounting. Through the first thing is the constructor, then the render, where it renders to the DOM. The React updates the DOM and the refs and everything, and when it's done, it calls the function component did mount. So basically, every component first mounts, executes the constructor, then calls the render, then calls component did mount, and every time we use set state, or we get new props, or we force an update, the render runs again. And that's why here we don't have to do anything after we update the state, because since we call this.set state again, what happens is that it executes render again. And since it executes render again, basically this value has changed. This.state.games has changed. And during the render, is going to inject into the DOM the new value this time. So we can see this actually at work. We need to hit Harissa every time. You need to hit Harissa before the start of the session, during the session, and after the session, Tarek. All the time. Like I said, so like I was saying, since it calls render again, it is going to send new data every time. Render is called, to summarize, every time we change either state or props. So whenever game cards receives a new prop here, a new value, whenever we change the state, thanks to this.set state, we call the render again. And as you can see in this diagram, that's how it works. Basically, we have the mounting, the update, and the unmounting. Unmounting, we didn't see it. Basically, unmounting is when a component is no longer visible in the DOM. If we want to delete it from the DOM, we'll see it later on. We'll be handling routing and pages. But for now, what's important is mounting and updating. Let's see in practice how that works, basically. How that works is that let's go in the game form here, and we'll do something or in the app, and that's called very easily. Let's add a constructor. Okay. and add a console.log. App is constructing, and call one in the render as well. App is rendering. And let's add a few lifecycle methods. Let's add component did mount. And component did update, which are basically, this is called after the first render. So console.log app did mount, and had a console log here where we say basically app state or props updated. So now let's see. We should, okay. It's super here. And okay. And let's go to our console. Let's clear the console and refresh. We don't need this anymore. Let's refresh our page. So you see what it did, it said, okay, let's get rid of hello is polluting our console. Okay. So here you see app is constructing. So basically first step is the constructor. App is rendering. So basically app went through the first render. And when it's done rendering, it says app did mount. So now if we change the state of the app, let's say here, we create a new game, Pokemon, JRPG, 1997, and made by Nintendo. If we submit a new game, you'll see the app rendered immediately again. And it says user state or props updated. It's because these functions are executed every time these things happen. And that's why earlier we used the mount to bound the ref, because we needed to be mounted into the DOM. But whenever we update the state or the props, the render method is called again, and the component did update method is called. That allows us to do really interesting things. For example, we want to run a function every time a value changes. For example, let's say here, I want to know how many games I have in my list. We have, let's say here, we have this dot state dot games dot length games. Now what's really interesting about did update is that can also take see, we have this and we can say here app did mount. So now what we do is that did update is really interesting because it can tell us, for example, here, let's start and add anything. Let's go fast here and write anything. And when you submit a new game, see, we have 3 games. It says we have 3 games now. And if we add again, it says, oh, we have 4 games now. Because if we need, for example, something to change or recalculate every time the state changes, we're gonna put it in did update because we want it to execute every time the state changes. Is that clear for everyone about lifecycle methods and how they are used? Does anyone have any question about this part? Okay. Actually, they're pre-created functions that you can find that are found in React.component, and you use them basically to either when you want to do things when it starts, or we used it yesterday to get for the example with when we wanted to get from an API, for example, or through an Ajax call, we used the component did mount. For example, if we wanted here If we're here, we were getting the games from an HTTP request, which we will see later. Where we would execute it is in the component did mount, because we wanted to do it at the start. Yes, you need to practice a lot. That's very important that you practice, please, guys. It's important that you practice. Try to build new stuff by yourself, but it's important to practice. What I would recommend as an unofficial assignment is that maybe go through the assignment that Mr. Safedi gave you with the add to cart button and the cart element, and try to rewrite it in React. That's a really good practice. It is not preferred to put a lot of code in component did mount Doa. No, not necessarily. It depends, actually. You should put in component did mount all the code that you want to run at the first render. If you have a lot of things to put when during the first render, then put it a lot of code in did mount. But yeah, you shouldn't put a lot in it.
الحلوق مقاسات الحلوق عشان نركب مش هلقيت
محمد
بس
can you mute your mic please
عندنا حتزيد فبدي قصقصها فهمت
Muhammad, can you mute your mic please? Okay, can you provide us an ebook or PDF as a reference to practice a lot? So I put in as a reference in the lesson the React documentation, which is really good and has a lot of tutorials. You can go into React and go into React docs, excuse me. And you can find really great things. You can go to Learn React and you can find a lot of things, actually. React for beginners, there are resources, practical tutorials, step-by-step guides. The practical tutorial is really good. And because you can build, you're going to build something with React with a tutorial, I can provide you the link if you want, but it's already in the presentation. Not a direct message. Everyone in the meeting, there. You can go through this, but there are a lot of references, and I think the official documentation is way good. It's very, very good. So I think you should definitely use that as a reference. Okay, so if no one has any questions about lifecycle methods, we can take a 15 minutes break and then get back to finish what we started. Hopefully we'll have enough time to finish everything we set out to do. We'll be using an API and so thank you guys for your attention, and we'll see you back in 15 minutes where we can complete this session, okay? All right. Try not to be late, guys, because we still have a lot of material to go through. Well, we'll get back to it in a minute when everyone's here. We should be good with the break in a minute. Please tell me in the chat when you guys are back in front of your screens. Okay, since you guys seem to be back, let's back into it. We still have a lot of things to go through. I hope the first part was clear and you guys have a good grasp of states and lifecycle components now. So let's go forward with the presentation. Next on our list is the Fetch API. So what is the Fetch API? Fetch API provides basically an interface to access resources across a network. You can compare it to Ajax calls, or like what you saw in the assignment with Mr. Safedi. You must have noticed the Axios calls to get store items from a distant API. Basically, Fetch is going to be an alternative to that Axios or to the default older API of XML HTTP request, more popularly called Ajax for those who use or know jQuery. Contrary to libraries like Axios or jQuery, though, Fetch is a browser API and requires the installation of no additional libraries. Why is that good? Is because whenever we add dependencies to our project, we're making the JavaScript bundle longer. What that means in turn is that our users, when they will be accessing our website will be slower to load because the JavaScript bundle is bigger and therefore takes longer to download. Depending on our user's internet connection, that may be important. So less dependency means smaller bundles. So for those who used, I noticed some of you already know Ajax from jQuery. And the main differences between Fetch and Ajax calls is basically the promise returned from Fetch won't reject with an error when the response is either an HTTP 404 or 500. It still returns normally an object, and you will have to parse the status to know the code. Also, Fetch, I mean, that won't mean much to most of you, but Fetch won't send cross-origin cookies unless we configure it to do so. What are cross-origin cookies? It's basically, for example, when you have authentication, let's say you connect with a user and password. Basically, you'll send an authentication cookie to the server. And Fetch won't send that cookie automatically unless you configure it to send the cookie every time. So those are the both main differences between Fetch and Ajax. In this example, what we'll be using for this project is an API that is free. Since we want to be writing server code, we'll be using an API that exists called Giant Bomb. What Giant Bomb is an API. It's an API for video games. It's video games that it allows us to access a video games database. So what we'll do is that instead of having a data.json like we did until now, we'll delete that JSON, and instead we'll be getting basically the data from an API using Fetch. Doa says Axios. Yes, it's basically going to be very similar to Axios. It has the same goal, but we won't have to download any additional dependencies. We have no need to basically download the Axios library for this. So we'll be still using the API made available by the browser. So let's get started with this. Let's go and take a look at the Giant Bomb API and how we can integrate it. Let's zoom in. So first thing we need to do is sign up for an API key or sign in with Google. Let's sign in with my Google account. And now it should allow me to use the API. Username must begin with a letter and contain only, let's give it my pseudonym, create a new account, already registered, okay. Let's give it another character and we should be good to go. Okay, so let's log in again, okay. And get to the API again. Giant Bomb API. You must be logged in to get the Giant Bomb API key. That's what I already did, right? Or maybe it. Why won't? Okay. See, now we have the API key. Let's save it somewhere to our React project. Let's go here and add a file that we'll call config.js. Let's call everything, let's close everything else. And here, let's go and export. Let's add a constant, excuse me, and we'll call it Giant Bomb API key. And we'll give it the key because we'll need it to use API calls. Okay, we're just gonna save it here. Now let's see. Not like this. Let's close this. We don't need this. Okay. Now let's go back. Now we have the API key. Let's go to the API list of resources to basically get games. We don't need most of this here. You'll see genres and everything. We only need games. We'll go to games, and this is our API. You have the URL. You should have seen that in Axios as well, you need a URL. And you'll notice the Giant Bomb, they use GET requests with API key in here. So let's go this here and basically get our URL. Let's add a new folder that we'll call services. And here we'll add a new file that we'll call games.js. And we'll export a new function called get all. We'll give it a limit, which was going to be how many games we want. Export const get all limit. And what we'll do is we'll start by having the URL equals what we saw on the website, but we need to add the API key. Here, we need the API key. So we need to export it. We need to import it here. Let's here add import from our configuration. And we should be finding the key here. What did we call it? The Giant Bomb API key. Oh, okay, we didn't export it. Export Giant Bomb API key. So this should be fine, and we should be able to add here Giant Bomb API key. So nothing too crazy until now. What we'll want to do though is basically return fetch of the URL. This is what we'll do as a service right now. We inserted the limit here. Why? Because in the documentation, you'll see here we have limit, which allows us to limit the number of results to display. By default, it will return 100 games, and we don't want that. So let's get only, let's say 5 games or 10 games. It's enough. So here we'll add another parameter, and it will be end limit equal limit, basically limit. And let's see what we can get from this. All right. So what we'll do is that we'll go back to our app here, and we'll get rid of our JSON. We'll go to game cards, and we're gonna delete this. We no longer need it. So now, if we go to the app, we no longer have a JSON, so we no longer have data to display. So let's start with an empty array. And if we go back to our app, we'll see that now we no longer have games in our list. What we'll do is that, like you did with Mr. Safedi in the assignment that you had with the cart and the electronic items, here we'll need to get all the games before we display them. So let's try this out, shall we? Let's have here a function that we'll call get my games list, and it will be an asynchronous function. And what we'll do here is that we'll import first our games service from services/games, and then here let's see what we can get. Let's have a try and catch, so we can catch errors. Console.log error. And here what we'll do is that we'll take a response equals await, basically game service dot get, how did we call it? We called it get all. Let's get all. And we'll give it a limit of 5, we said. And then let's console.log the response. All right. And now we'll execute this in the component mount, because we wanted to execute whenever we start our component. We want to go and execute get my games list. All right. So let's see how that goes. Okay. Import everything as game service from there. Okay. So it says here, okay, type error, failed to fetch, why? Error API fault, access blocked by course. No one said, let's look at our network to see if there are any issues here. API key is right and the limit is right, but it is not working. It's not returning anything. Why? Let's try this request with our Postman. I don't know if you know Postman. It's a tool basically to try requests. So let's see if there is any error when we use Postman. Let's try this. Let's add a new get. Let's zoom in so you guys can see. And let's send the same request we just sent and try sending it through Postman and see if there is any error here. SSL certificate response, disable certifications, data okay. What is the issue here? Let's see, we get, well, let's see it in JSON. Visualize or preview. What we get is this, so we should be getting this. Let's see in headers, what do we have? We have 7 hidden headers. Maybe there is something missing here. Token host, accept, and connection. So it seems to me that we're doing everything right. Why are we not getting the values here? API documentation. Let's see, status code. So we should be getting integer, so invalid MPI key. And what is the error we are getting? Format. Let's add format here, maybe. Yeah, I mean, there seems to be a problem somewhere, but I am looking for it. Format equal JSON, maybe here, and we should be getting a body here. This should be okay. Pretty, and or error okay, no errors, and everything runs fine. But it seems to me that we may be missing a header here. So what might it be? It seems in our fetch, we might be missing some headers here. So let's add the JSON as well. Format equal JSON, and let's see what that gives us. This should be fine, right? Let's get back to our website and see if that works any better. So no, it is missing allow origin header. So it is blocking us due to course. So let's add, okay. Why is it? So it seems, yeah, Bomb is blocking us here. Let's see if we can, per policy. So let me just take a look at Jane Bomb's API. Here, let's see if there are any issues. Okay, so it seems here that there are some issues with fetch when using it with giant bomb. Giant bomb, API, fetch course error. This is a shame. It seems we are having an issue with this. What if I use JSON-P? Maybe some people are saying use JSON-P, maybe. Let's see if that works any better. No, that does not. PI key, let's see. Are we missing any headers, request headers, authority, method get, API, accept, deflate? Let's add maybe a course Chrome extension and maybe try to allow course by default. Let's add this extension and see if that works. Allow course and reload the active tab. Seems it's doing nothing for us right now. access, load, rows. Okay, let's see if that works now. Okay, we seem to be having an issue with the fetch API here. I mean, let's try it with Axios like you guys did with Mr. Safedi. So the course is actually coming from their server bomb API server, Muhammad, and not from us. So actually the course header should be added from their side, but it says we're missing allow origin header from their side. So they're not allowing us to basically work with that from the local host. Let's see if that improves with fetch. I'm not sure it will do the trick, but let's try it anyway. Since we don't have a lot of time, I'd rather we go forward with this. So let's try with fetch maybe. I am sorry for the delay. With access, I'm sorry. It should work the same. Let's add access to our project. And now we should, okay, we should build it again and go here and maybe call Axios here. Don't need this again. Let's import Axios from Axios. And instead of using fetch, let's use axios.get and see if that does any, performs any better. Actually, no, it does not. This does exactly the same error. Invalid API key. That is weird. It actually says invalid API key. If I open it, did we make a mistake when putting the API key? Let's go back to the API. Log in. I mean, the API key works, and I mean, I already have an account. Why is it asking me to create a new account? Let's see in Postman if we have the same API key. Let's take this and put it here. It says invalid API key. What's the matter with giant bomb? Does it still work? And it says unauthorized now. Invalid API key. Has our what? Has our API key been deleted or something? Yeah, but GitHub API doesn't get us gains, Najar. That's the issue I have right now. You have 7 requests in the last hour, and your request rate is fine. So why doesn't it work? Let's go here and have the API key changed. It is the same, unauthorized. JSON parent, JSON callback term argument. Okay, it seems we have a problem with giant bomb. Please let me, I'll see what the issue is on my side, and we'll do it. We'll come back to this on the next course. Let's keep it as is for now. Let's remove access and let's keep it at fetch. And we'll actually fake this with return a new promise. Let's get back. I don't want us to be late. resolve and reject, and let's basically resolve our old data, just so we can move on with the exercise and not lose a lot of time with this. So I'll be getting my data from here. GitHub. I'll go back and get my data.json. Okay, and 1 second. Let me get it back. Since I deleted the JSON already. Let's have it return this, and let's say this is the result of the fetch. We'll get back to this next session, so I can, but for movies or films. Okay, I'll use this. Let me take a look at the Swappy dev API maybe. Okay, I'll be using this then, and I will be getting back to JVent API maybe next time. Thank you for the suggestion. Let's see if that works fine. And have the URL. Thank you for this suggestion for Swappy. And let's do this const URL and give it here the API. We won't be having issues when we're managing our own API later on, but let's see how that will work. Let's close Postman. We don't need this and get back on track. So now we get in films. Everything is going fine. Let's see our console, and we should be getting the response here and the body. And now we should be getting. So now we have the response correctly. Let's get its content. So let's get back to our code and go here to our app where we call this. We had get my games list. Let's get rid of this to get more space. Let's review what we did. Basically, we added a new function called get my games list that goes and calls the API we want. And then console logging the response, but now we need the data inside the response. How we do that with fetch is that we need to go into the data, which we will do in a second. We'll need to have here a weight that get all, and then we need to have our JSON here with a weight, again, response.json. Let's now take a look at the JSON we're getting because we want it to be a JSON. Okay, let's get back here, clean our console and reload the page. So where is it? Here we go. We got results. Basically, these are the movies we want. Let's map them to an object we want, As you remember, we want an object to look like, we need to have the title, we need to have a year of production, we need to have a genre, and we need to have a developer. This gives us movies, as you can see here, but we'll manage, all right? Let's now take our JSON and have map go through it. Let's go for I in the response, the JSON.result. We got 6 here. So let's have here, let const my game, let's have here games list or have list with an empty array. And for here, let's make it an I because it's shorter. And we'll have here JSON dot results, as we've seen in the console.log here. We have 6 results. Let's loop through them and have game, even though it's a movie. Let's fake it for now. Every game is going to be JSON.results.I. We will push to our list.push. We'll push the title is going to be a game.title. Title. We need a genre. We'll see here if we have a genre. We have producer. We don't have a genre. What we will call it? We'll call it basically we'll put the URL there maybe, or the producer. Let's put the producer. Game.producer. In year, we'll put basically the release date. Game.release date. And in the developer, we'll put game dot what we see here, the director. When we're done pushing this, when we're done looping, what we want to do is that we're going to set state. This is the set state, and we're gonna set our games to be this list we had and we got from the API. All right, let's take a look. It should be mapping as soon as the network answers. We're not getting our games. Where did it stop? I see no errors. Let's take a look here, console.log, game. And here, let's console.log our list. Our list. Let's look at the network. It should have answered. So the list is empty, weirdly enough. For I, this is weird. So.log JSON. Test. This is weird. Why doesn't it find anything now? JSON.results. We have the results here, and the list seems to be empty. List.push. This doesn't seem to be working. This is weird. Oh, my bad. I forgot the dot length here. Sometimes it's stupid mistakes like this. I forgot the length in the loop. So let's get back here and we should be getting what we need. Everything is fine, as you can see, but we're not getting the title. Why? Let's take a look at our responses. Network. Why isn't it called title? Response. Preview. Results. Yes, it's called title. Have I wrote it badly? No, game.title. Or did we use to call it, what is it? Let's go to the game card. Maybe we didn't call it title. We called it name. So my bad. Let's go back here and just call this name. And we should be getting everything from the API now. And that doesn't stop us from adding anything we want. 1997, and the developer, Nintendo. This doesn't stop us from adding new things like you can see here. We can add as many as we want, but we're getting an initial state from an API. Unfortunately, we couldn't make it work with Giant Bomb, but the concept is the same. The important part is that you are able to fetch from an API, and we can get rid of Axios, actually, that I created, added earlier, because we don't need that. npm remove Axios. We don't need Axios. So this is about the API. This is the fetch API. I will look into Giant Bomb so I can show you maybe the fix that I found in the next session, but it's not relatively important to what we're trying to do here, since the problem isn't from us, but from their side. So as you can see, it's relatively easy to get data from a server as well. All you need to do is call it basically in the lifecycle method that we learned when the component is mounted. So when it's mounted, you go call it, and basically you're done. You put it in the state, and then you manipulate it however you see fit. It makes everything easier. That's why I think it would be a very nice exercise if you guys could take a look at the assignment of Mr. Safedi with the cart and the items and try to rewrite all of that in React. I think it would be very interesting practice. So this is how we use basically an API to get our data in React. So there we go. Let's go to the next step of our course. We still have some things to see. So the Reactor Router. This is very important. Some of you talked about pages earlier. This is a very important part of React. Why? Because some of you may have noticed, and some of you may have not. But in React, we have only one HTML file, which is this one. We've seen it together. Apart from this, we have no other HTML file. And everything we do is done manipulation in one single HTML page. So we don't have many pages. We only have one. There are no pages in React, but for the user's perspective, we need to still have pages. So what is that called? So basically, React builds what we call a single page application. So that means we load only one single page to our browser, our internet browser, and we change its content with JavaScript. In this particular situation, React does it for us. But a critical feature in such applications is how we can navigate between fake pages, not real pages, but fake pages. They're not real pages, since it's a single page application, but from the user's point of view, well, he's navigating between pages. And then a good example of that is Gmail, or even a lot of applications, actually. Let us take a look. For example, when you go to, I don't know, let's go to Gmail. You'll see my emails, and you see I got a mail from Giant Bomb. And basically what that does is, if you look at the URL on top, you'll see I have a path, but technically this is a single page application. Look, if I scroll with this open, nothing changes. So we use the URL to know what we display, but in reality, it's just a single page. If we inspect the page and look at the elements, you'll see that basically it doesn't reload the page when we move, only the body changes. Look, the page is relatively the same, but we're changing some things with JavaScript. So we're trying to do the same thing now with React. And that is called routing. React, being a library and not a framework, it doesn't include a routing solution out of the box. Unlike, for example, Angular, which manages it as a framework, it already has its own routing. React doesn't. So there is a very great, very good complementary library that almost everyone uses that is called the Reactor Router. that we'll go take a look on, and we'll try to implement in our project to add a new page. So let's go here. We'll make a new page for our cart, thanks to this, that we'll explore at a later time. So what we'll do here is that we want to have, let's see, we want to install it. So you have a command to install it. It's not hard, it's not complicated. We're gonna take this command and let's zoom maybe so you can see better. We're gonna take this command and we'll go install Reactor Router into our project. This and npm install. Okay, we got Reactor Router now in our project. Let's start our server again and hide this terminal because I don't want to see it. You can close this. We already have a page open for localhost. So what we'll do now is we'll need to go to app. First, we want to create what we'll call a new page. Let's add here a folder that we'll call pages. Pages are basically components. So it's the same thing. We're just creating a new folder just so it's organized and we know what's a page and what's a component. We'll create a new folder for our page component and we'll call it cart. And under cart, I'll be creating index.js. And let's create our class component as we usually do. I think you guys by now master this part. And let's go and create cart extends react.component. We need to have a render function. And basically we'll just return h1. This is your cart. And of course, we're going to export this here. Now our issue, whoops, let's write cart. So our issue here is that we don't want this component to show. We could add it here. Cart. Comment this. We could do it like this. But now we should have our cart. Can't resolve cart. Oh, not components, I'm sorry, which is in pages. So now you'll see we have this is your cart at the bottom of our page, but we don't want it to display to be displayed here. That's not what we want. We want it to be in a separate page. So now let's use Reactor Router for that. We'll see how do we use that. We'll see we installed it. Okay. And as you can see, now let's start implementing it. So we'll come to our app and we need to import a few things from Reactor Router, as we'll do it in a second. So we installed it and we'll have to install a few things. We installed the Reactor Router only. We actually missed a component as another library we need to install. React, I forgot about this, but React Router DOM, because we're using it on the web, we need to have this library as well, which is called React Router DOM. React Router only won't be enough in this case. So we're good. Let's run back our server and hide this. Don't need this. Okay. So now what we're going to do is that we need to import some components from React Router DOM. We'll come here and we'll add a few things. Let's hide this because it's distracting. We'll import a few things. We'll import our browser router as router. We need to call it router. We import our switch. We'll import our routes and link. These are the main things that you need from Reactor Router. Let's get it from Reactor Router DOM. Okay. So now we have everything. So first thing we need to do is take our whole app. What is it? The whole app here. And we need to wrap it in the router component we just imported. We need to put it all in the router component. Okay, that's the first thing. Then what we'll need to do is we'll need to basically add what we call a switch. We'll call a switch. Let's have this here, the ID app, and here we'll have a switch that we just imported that's going to switch between routes. And then we'll need to have route and path. We'll have path here that is like this. And this will take a component. We'll have a page here that we'll make a new page actually that we'll call list, where we'll put our old page. Index.js, we'll have this here. Let's do it again. Import React from React, class list from class list extend, sorry, React.component, render, and we'll have some things here. We'll move some things here. Export default list. So we'll move the logic we had in. The sounds were clear, but the image is late when it moves from one interface to another. Is this a problem with internet, or is everyone noticing that? So yeah, some of you have noticed. So maybe I'll try to wait for a second after I switch interfaces. This is kind of weird. Okay. So the render here. What we'll do is that we'll go and take from the app a lot of things that we had here. We're going to take almost everything. Actually, we're going to take the game form and game cards that we had. We're going to move them here. We're going to have here a div with the ID being list. I'm going to move this here. And here we're going to take all the logic we created here as well, from the component did update to everything here to the state. We're going to take all of this and move it outside of the app and have it in its own page. So let's take this here. All of this we already did, so it shouldn't be a problem. So we have the constructor here that we do not need. We used it as to explain, and it seems we have an accolade missing or something. Okay. So now all of this is moved here, and to check it out, we can actually have, let's delete this just to see how it looks. Before we move on and add another page here, we'll see that we no longer need all of this. We can move it to the list. And then we need to go back one additional. And in the app here, all we'll need is another page, our new page called list. And we'll need also to move the service here as well. And we need to go back one folder, because actually more than one folder, because we're in the pages. So maybe like this. And like this, we update all the paths, and we should be good to go. So now we can see that everything still works by just calling list here. Let's check everything out, and you see the render method should have a return statement. It seems that we're missing something in the list. Where is it in the list? Yeah, we missed the return here. Okay. So now everything works. You see, we did nothing. We did nothing special. We just moved everything we did to its own page on the list. But now we don't want to call it directly here. So that's the important part of our router. We'll be adding a switch here. And we'll be adding routes. So we'll add a route with the path. And we say here, for example, we want it to be this exact path. And we need here to give it which page to render with this path. Let's render the list here. And let's have another one here called with a path /cart, which should be exact as well. And we'll have it being cart. Right? Is it clear until now? Is everything clear? So basically what we did here is we downloaded Reactor Router, DOM. We moved everything we had in the app to its own page. And we have a switch component. We need to wrap everything in a router component. And we need to call switch, which will basically be switching between these routes according to a path. Please stop me if anything is not clear. Let's try it out. If we go back here, what we'll notice is everything works fine because we're at the root and we gave it the path being this one. Being, being localhost, only localhost 3000. That means we're at the root. And that's the path it's taken by our router, right? That's what we put here, router path / and exact. So that's what our root. Now, if we wanted to move to cart, if we wrote here and the address, we add /cart, you'll see we got, this is your cart now. So depending on where the link we are in the page, it's switching correctly. But now we need to add links because we don't want to be writing our link in the URL. So let's add that. You'll see here, we'll add a new div called class name. Let's call it navigation or nav bar. And here what we'll do is that we'll add links. Basically, you see here we imported link from Reactor Router DOM. What we can do is we can add link to slash, this is games list. And we can have another link with cart, my cart, right? So now if you go back here, you'll see that, well, let's have some CSS actually. Let's have some CSS and have it here. Where are we calling it? We'll have something, imports. Is it importing the style here? Okay, let's have the CSS and have .nav bar and have the font size be, I don't know, 2 rem. And let's have it be flex display flex. And have it direction flex direction being a row. We can have justify content flex start. And we can have here another one for the links where we get, okay, we can give it a margin of 5 pixels by 15 pixels. There. So we have our navigation bar on top and we can move from one page to the other. as you can see. Is there any questions regarding that? Is anything unclear about what we did with the Reactor Router? No? All right, cool. So basically, you don't really have to have it like this. You can have also buttons in the router. We can go here and have anything you want in the link. Actually, you can have a button, for example, and it will still work. You don't necessarily have to put only text. If you want to customize, if I go here, you'll see that it still works. So no issues whatsoever with that. Actually, we can even go here and make it both buttons. And both buttons here. And we can give it both a class name if you want to customize our CSS and say nav button. And we can add to the CSS here .nav bar .nav button. We can have it have any CSS we want. Maybe the font size is not big enough. Font size we want it to be 2 times EM. We want the padding to be 1 EM, or maybe half of that, 0.5 EM. So it looks better. We can have a border as well if you want. Border and oops. We can actually copy it even from here, maybe in the components and cards. We have a nice styling here with the cards, with the box shadow and everything. We can copy anything here. We can have the box shadow and the border radius here, maybe copied. This will be quite, it will look maybe a bit nicer. Yeah, so there we go. It looks a bit better now, and we can move at will between both. We'll still need to add functionality to my cart. We'll do that on our next session, I believe. But for now, we have one last concept I wanted to show you before we leave the session, which are prop types. It's basically, it's the last chapter before I leave you when we end the session. Basically, what prop types are, they're not necessary, but they are basically type checks for components to check if you have your props correctly set up. And they help you basically have a stabler application because it tells you when you are missing a prop in a component that you expect to have. Basically, it's a different library that we need to install. It's called prop types. We'll go through this quickly. We'll install npm install, save prop types. There we go. We can start again now that we have all our dependencies. Of course, like usual, we close this because we don't need it. We hide this. Which is better to use TypeScript of prop types. Type checking in TypeScript is better because it doesn't check at runtime, it checks at compilation time. Prop types checks at runtime, but technically it depends on your preferences. You can use TypeScript, or you can use, if you use JavaScript, it's better to use prop types. But usually if you use TypeScript, it's not necessary to use prop type. But here, let's keep it in JavaScript. TypeScript adds a layer of complexity in handling types and everything. So for this course, we won't be handling TypeScript, but actually they are different. I don't believe there is one better than the other. They are just different. One checks types at runtime, and now the other checks it at compilation time. So it's really different. But yeah, if you know how to write TypeScript, please do. But it kind of changes a bit how we write everything. So let's go forward with prop types. Basically, what we do, for example, here in game card, let's go to a simple thing. Here we expect games data to come. All right. What happens here if I go to list and I forgot to give it its props? I go to the form data and hey, I forgot to give it this prop. My application will crash because we're trying to map. It says, hey, we cannot read map of undefined. As you can see here, we're trying to map props.games data. And since we didn't give the prop, it just simply doesn't exist. Prop types allows us to handle that error. So our application doesn't crash. So what we do here is that we're going to import prop types. So we're going to import prop types from prop types. Nothing unusual. And here, before we export, we're going to add another line, which is list.prop types, which is basically going to be an object. In this case, we have only one prop, which is our, oh, excuse me, it seems we're in the wrong component. We're not adding it to the list. My bad, adding it to game cards. So here we're going to import prop types from prop types. And we're going to add, like I said, another line before we export, game cards.prop types. And this is going to be an object. And we're going to tell it which props we expect. Here, the issue comes from games data, right? We're trying to map it and we forgot to give it its undefined. So what we do is we go here, we go to games data, we add something here, games data, prop types dot array, and we say it's required, we need it. So that since it's done at runtime, that won't stop us from the crash. It will still crash. But in the console, we can see that it tells us that, where is it? It will tell us that it is failed prop type, this here. Failed prop type, the prop games data is marked as required, but its value is undefined. So basically, it doesn't fix your errors, but it tells you where the error is so you can better find your errors. There is also a way we can fix using prop types this specific case of a component not passed by not using is required. We can go here, not give is required, but instead give what we call default props. So we go here, game cards.default props, and we can say, hey, games data, you should be getting this prop, but if you don't get it, please use an empty array so it doesn't crash. And now you can see that it won't crash anymore. But we're simply not getting the data. But we're giving it a default prop in this case. But now if I go in the list and I give it back the prop it's expecting games data, this.state.games, it should render my props again. But it is important that we use prop types and default props to write good, readable, and stable React applications. So you'll find the source code in the link. I will share with you the presentation after we are done. But basically, we'll find also the references as usual. But we are done for today. So please, if you have any questions, don't hesitate, and we'll review them now before we end for today. Do you guys have any questions on what we saw today? No questions at all? Everything is clear? Why we do not take one big application and implement every lesson theories over it? I mean, that's what we are doing, Ahmed Abu Bakr. We have one single app right now, which is building a games card application, and we're implementing every lesson theory over it. That's what we're doing right now with React. No? If I could go fast over the prop types again. Okay, so prop types, let's go to game cards. Basically, prop types is a library we downloaded. It's not there at the start. We download it and install it using npm. And what prop type does is that we can add this, which tells it basically what props the component is expecting. Here in the list page that used to be in the app, we send the game's data in a prop, right? We did it earlier today. We send it a prop. But what if we mistake it or we forget to send it in another page? Maybe you have another page with the with this prop. We're using this component. Because the good thing about components is that we can reuse them however many times we want. What if one time we forget to give it the prop? Basically, what we use is prop types, like we did here. We tell it which props we are expecting, their type. So we expect the game's data prop, and we expect it to be an array. And if we do not get this prop at all, we can define default props and give it an empty array so it doesn't crash. Otherwise, if we don't give it anything, it will crash here saying map is not a function of undefined because game's data is undefined in props. Basically, that's all prop types does. And here we can have multiple types. For example, if we have another prop, we can have prop types dot string is required. We can have another one bar. We can have a number is required. We can have a function. We can have a Boolean if it's true or false. Basically, here we say what type we want for our prop and if it is required or not. I would advise you to not use the is required and instead define the default props. Since is required won't stop your application from crashing if you forget to put in the prop. Is that clearer, Doa? Cool. So, and we are done with today's lesson. I will send you the source code, and I believe Isra will send us the recording link a bit later. You will able to access. You'll be able to access the code, so you can review what we did today. And please review it because it's important that we review and try to build something by yourself. About last week, I told you yesterday, but I'm going to repeat it today. We are pushing the deadline for the assignment I gave you last week, since not a lot of you seem to be done with it. I agreed with Mr. Safadi that he will be able to assist you on site if you need help next week. So please go forward to that. What about the session for next week? Next week, we'll have the third part. It's going to be at the same time, I believe. I will coordinate with BTI and tell you if there is a change, but supposedly it should be at the same time. We're going to have the third and last part of our React course. Then on Sunday, we'll have a review of the assignments, common mistakes, and we'll review everything we've seen. We have a dedicated session to review everything we've seen so far before we move on to the web and mobile specialized groups. Okay, so if no one has any questions and it's completely clear, we can call it a day, and I'll share the presentation and code with you guys, and the recording should come a bit later. Okay. Good. Thank you everyone for being present and focused and for asking good questions as always, even though I always hope you would ask a bit more. Please review and practice, and I will see you next week. Have a good week, everyone, and goodbye.